Continuing the reading of Sri Krishna Samhita by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. This is the conclusion. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhaktavrinda. O Brahman Vyasadeva, it is decided by the learned that the best remedial measure for removing all troubles and miseries is to dedicate one's activities to the service of the Supreme Lord, Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Fruitive activities are simply a disturbance, even if they are performed without motive. Therefore, unless the activities one performs according to one's qualification are offered either to Brahman through knowledge, to the Supersoul through the results, or to the Supreme Lord through the path of attachment, such activities will never yield auspiciousness. We will describe the path of attachment in its proper place. The activities one performs to achieve the supreme goal must be directed towards the worship of the Supersoul, the Lord of Sacrifice. Worship of the Lord cannot be given up either in constitutional or conditional activities, because one is enjoined to perform his prescribed duties with a sense of gratefulness towards the Supreme Lord, and this is called worshiping the Lord. Desirous activities are meant for low-class people, yet there is an arrangement to dovetail those activities in relation to the Lord, as stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam. A person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of all material desire, without any material desire, or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the Personality of Godhead. Jnana is also considered a means of attaining spiritual perfection. The Supreme Brahman and the living entities are beyond material creation. The Jnanis conclude that certain transcendental activities are the only means to attain the Supreme Brahman, which is the goal of spiritual life. Although karma is sufficient for maintaining one's body and family life, it is born of material activities, so has no potency to detach one from matter. Through karma, one's mind is trained to concentrate on the Supreme Lord, but one cannot achieve eternal benefit until material activities are given up. One achieves spiritual results only by spiritual endeavors. A living entity should first discuss the material world, and after subduing all material qualities and existence, he should engage in samadhi to attain the wealth of Brahman. As long as one remains in a material body, he must accept bodily activities. There are two types of jnana, knowledge of Brahman and knowledge of the Supreme Lord. By knowledge of Brahman, a soul achieves the result of merging with Brahman. Such Brahmagyanis do not accept the independent existence of a soul after merging. Brahman is impersonal, and when a soul is liberated, he becomes impersonal and merges with Brahman. This type of practice is a stimulation for cultivating knowledge of the Supreme Lord, as the Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita concerning the purpose of devotional service. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed, and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engage in the welfare of all. At last achieve me, for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested, impersonal feature of the Supreme. Advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. The main purport of these three verses is that when the material conception of a living entity is destroyed by the cultivation of Brahmagyan, impersonal knowledge, then by the association of devotees and the mercy of the Lord, he attains a spirit truly variegated Supreme Lord. The contamination of this material world pollutes the concentration or samadhi of a living entity so much that after giving up the material elements, from the 5 gross elements up to the false ego, one needs to focus on the impersonal Brahman in the beginning of one's samadhi. But when the spirit soul transcends material pains and attains oneness with Brahman, then, with fixed intelligence through samadhi, he soon sees the variegatedness of Vaikuntha. Then, uncertainty will no longer block his ability to see the Lord. Then, the beauty of Vaikuntha gradually manifests and satisfies the transcendental eyes of the devotee. At this point, Brahmagyan transforms into Bhagavat Gyan, knowledge of the personality of Godhead. When one's knowledge of the Supreme Lord awakens, he automatically understands all mysteries regarding the Lord. Therefore, jnana, which is a means for achieving the absolute truth, is also recommended as abhideya, or a means for achieving the ultimate goal. If one cultivates knowledge of the Supreme Lord, then there is a good possibility of awakening pure love, which is the living entity's prayojana. It is necessary to say one thing about jnana. Knowledge of the Supreme Lord is natural knowledge, whereas nescience and too much knowledge are unnatural knowledge. Nescience results in adoration of matter, and too much knowledge results in atheism, monism. Adoration of matter has two forms. Positive adoration is to accept material characteristics as knowledge of the Supreme Lord, and negative adoration is to accept material characteristics as the Supreme. Those who engage in positive adoration accept and worship a material image as the Supreme. Those who engage in negative worship accept the negative features of material characteristics as Brahman. Such people conclude that the Supreme is impersonal, without form, without activity, without senses. Regarding these two classes, the Srimad Bhagavatam states, thus, by all this, the external feature of the personality of Godhead is covered by gross forms such as those of planets, which were explained to you by me. Therefore, beyond this gross manifestation is a transcendental manifestation, finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Therefore, it is beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation and is distinct from the material conception. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described unto you, from the material angle of vision is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know him well. Both of the above-mentioned features of the Lord are material. Swan-like scholars should disregard the gross and subtle features of the Lord and eternally focus on his transcendental form. Therefore, acceptance of the gross form of the Supreme, as well as acceptance of the impersonal form, are both products of nescience, and always contradictory. When reasoning overcomes knowledge and becomes established as argument, then one does not accept the soul as eternal. In this situation, the philosophy of atheism is born. When knowledge comes under the subordination of reasoning and gives up its nature, then one aspires for merging. This aspiration is born from too much knowledge and does not benefit the living entity, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. O lotus-eyed one, those who think they are liberated in this life, but do not render devotional service to you, must be of impure intelligence. Although they accept severe austerities and penances and rise to the spiritual position, to impersonal Brahman realization, they fall down again because they neglect to worship your lotus feet. Even by proper reasoning, too much knowledge cannot be beneficial. We will now give 4 considerations in this regard. 1. If merging with the Supreme Brahman were the living entity's ultimate goal, then we would have to imagine that the living entities have been created by the Lord out of cruelty. If we did not introduce such an improper existence, we would not feel any difficulty. If we accept Maya as the sole creator in order to verify Brahman as faultless, then we are bound to accept an independent truth that is separate from Brahman. 2. When a soul merges with Brahman, neither are benefited. 3. In the eternal pastimes of the Absolute Truth, there is no need for souls to merge in Brahman. 4. If one does not fully accept the quality of variegatedness, which is the manifestation of the Lord's energies, then there is no possibility of existence, knowledge, or happiness. And as a result, the Supreme Brahman is considered impersonal and without basis. One may even develop doubts about the existence of Brahman. But if one accepts the quality of variegatedness as eternal, then the soul cannot merge with Brahman. Please refer to Mayavad Shatadishani for an elaboration on this subject. If one can understand the relationship between knowledge and love, then one will see that there is no discord between them. The original feelings of a soul are one's constitutional duties. These original feelings expand in two ways. 1, they expand in the form of knowledge of an object and its characteristics. 2, they expand through the realization of rasa. Another name for the first way is jnana, or speculative knowledge, which is naturally dry and troublesome. Another name for the second way is priti, or love. At the time of priti, we see a proportionate increase in one relative to the respective decrease in the other. As jnana increases, priti decreases. As priti increases, jnana decreases. When jnana attains its highest platform, then the original feelings of the soul become one. This platform is dry and totally devoid of happiness. When priti attains its highest platform, the original feelings of the soul are not lost. Rather, they become alive in the subjects of sambandha, abhideya, and prayojana. And they then expand the rasa of love. Therefore, expanding love is the only prayojana for a living entity. Pure attachment to the Supreme is called bhakti. Bhakti, or devotional service, is defined as the activities a conditioned soul performs out of attachment for the supersoul. Some of these activities resemble karma, and some resemble jnana. The gross bodily activities are called karma, and the subtle bodily activities are called jnana. Devotional service is the practice meant for conditioned souls, so it cannot be called priti, or love. When priti is awakened, it should be understood that devotional service has reached its full maturity. It's not possible to elaborately describe each of the stages of devotional service, so we will describe only the main stages. If, after understanding the basic science of bhakti, the esteemed reader studies devotional scriptures such as Chandila Sutra's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, then all the topics related with devotional service will be understood. Bhakti, like priti, has two natures: opulent, based on Aishvarya, and sweet, based on Madhurya. When bhakti is attracted by the glories and opulences of the Lord, it is called Aishvarya Bhakti. A mood of servitude arises from the practitioner's feelings of insignificance. The Lord is known as the extraordinary master due to his supremely opulent aspect. Then the Lord, who is supremely opulent, appears as the King of Kings, Narayan, and bestows auspiciousness on the living entities. This is not temporary, it is eternal and everlasting. The Supreme Lord is by nature full of all opulences. One cannot separate opulences from the Lord, but he also possesses a wonderfully sweet feature, which is superior to that of opulence. When the sweet nature of bhakti becomes prominent, then the sweet feature of the Lord is manifest, and the opulent nature of bhakti becomes invisible, just as the moon is invisible in the presence of the sun. When the nature of opulence becomes invisible, the Lord becomes subject of higher rasas. Then the heart of a practitioner takes shelter at different rasas like Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya. The Lord then manifests as Krishna, personification of compassion for his devotees, the abode of supreme bliss, the attractor of everyone's heart. It is not that Krishna has manifested from Narayan, but they are both eternally wonderful and everlasting. The different forms of the Lord manifest according to the nature and qualification of the devotee. The personality of Krishna is the shelter of the topmost of the 5 primary rasas of the living entities. Therefore, Lord Krishna is accepted as the topmost personality in the science of Bhakti and Priti. The subject has been clearly explained in Sri Krishna Samhita. If we deeply consider, we can understand that only topics concerning the Lord should be discussed. In order to understand the non-dual truth, we have to consider the 3 features of the absolute truth described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. At first, due to indirect perception, the absolute truth is known as Brahman. The direct form of Brahman is not visible. Only an indirect form of the absolute truth is realized through jnana. Attainment of knowledge is the highest achievement of inquiry into Brahman. Yet, in Brahman, one cannot relish knowledge because in Brahman there is no difference between the enjoyer and the enjoyed. In the second case, through the help of direct and indirect features, the Paramatma or Supersoul is known by the individual soul. Although, in this case, there is a hint of difference between soul and supersoul. Due to the absence of the complete form of the Lord, this feature of Paramatma is only known through artificial samadhi. At this juncture, the devotee of the Lord cannot fully manifest variegated exchanges. The Lord, or Bhagavan, is the only worshipful truth. He is therefore mentioned in the conclusion of the previously quoted verse. Among the many qualities of the Lord, he is manifest as Brahman by one of those qualities, and as Paramatma by another of those qualities. But when all the qualities are gathered together, the feature of the Lord described in Srimad Bhagavatam, just as the universal elements, becomes manifest in the heart of the living entities through samadhi. Of all the names and forms of the Lord current in the world, the form of Bhagavan mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam is the most pure. That is why Paramahamsa Samhita is known as Bhagavat. The absolute truth, Bhagavan, is the source of all qualities. The word Bhagavan refers to 6 principal qualities mentioned in the Vishnu Purana as follows. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is He who is full in 6 opulences. He has full strength, fame, wealth, knowledge, beauty, and renunciation. It is to be understood at this point that the Lord is not simply a collection of qualities. Rather, the qualities are naturally manifest in a particular form. Among the 6 qualities of the Lord, opulence and beauty are seen as one in his form. The other 4 qualities shine brightly as his characteristics. In the opulent form of the Lord, the quantity of enjoyment is less, while in the sweet form of the Lord, enjoyment is more relishable because only sweetness is experienced. Opulence and the 5 other qualities are identified as characteristics of that form. There is naturally an inverse ratio between sweetness and opulence. Opulence decreases in proportion to the increase in sweetness, and sweetness decreases in proportion to the increase in opulence. The wonderful feature of sweetness in the Lord is exhibited by independence and equality between the devotee and the Lord. In this position, the Lord maintains his features as the Supreme Controller, as Brahman, and as Paramatma, because the Absolute Truth naturally remains non-dual, although according to the qualifications of the devotee, he appears differently. The form of Sri Krishna, who is the sweet Kadamba flower of Madhurya Ras, is the only independent object of spiritual cultivation. As Shukadev Goswami described the Rasa Leela, Maharaj Parikshit had a doubt whether cultivation of God consciousness without a tinge of opulence could be successful. So he inquired, O sage, the gopis knew Krishna only as their lover, not as the supreme absolute truth. So how could these girls, their minds caught up in the waves of the modes of nature, free themselves from material attachment? In response to this question, Shukadev Goswami replies, this point was explained to you previously, since even Shishupal, who hated Krishna, achieved perfection. Then what to speak of the Lord's dear devotees? O King, the Supreme Lord is inexhaustible and immeasurable, and he is untouched by the material modes because he is their controller. His personal appearance in this world is meant for bestowing the highest benefit on humanity. Among the 6 qualities, headed by opulence, the quality of beauty is the best. This was concluded by Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, those who support this, whether Kanista Adhikari or Uttama Adhikari, will attain the supreme goal. By the strength of their sadhana, the Kanista Adhikaris give up connection with material qualities, which are born from pious and impious activities, and become Uttama Adhikaris, and thus achieve Krishna, while the Uttama Adhikaris receive some adipani, or instigation, and enter the rasa dance. The primary symptoms of bhakti are described in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as follows. One should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Shri Krishna favorably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. The symptom of pure bhakti is favorable loving service. But favorable loving service unto whom? Brahman, Paramatma, or Narayan? No, it is not to Brahman, because Brahman is an impersonal object of thought. Devotion has no shelter in Brahman. Nor is loving service offered to Paramatma, because Paramatma is known through the path of yoga. Therefore, Paramatma is not the object of devotion. Nor is devotional service exactly meant for Narayan, because all the propensities of bhakti cannot take shelter of Narayan. When a living entity's knowledge of and thirst for Brahman is given up, the knowledge of the Supreme Lord arises along with Shanta Ras. This Ras is meant for Narayan. But this Ras has an indifferent mood. When affection for Narayan arises, then the relationship between servant and Lord awakens. With this feature of Narayan, however, this relationship cannot advance further, because the form of Narayan can never be the goal of Shakya, Vatsalya, or Madhurya Ras. Who will have the courage to put his arm around Narayan's neck and say, "Oh, my friend, I have brought some gift for you, please take it"? Which living entity is able to take Narayan on their lap and kiss him in a parental mood? Who can say, "Oh, my beloved, you are the Lord of my life, I'm your wife"? How great is Narayan, the Lord of immense opulence and King of kings, and how incapable are the insignificant, poor, and fallen living entities. For such living entities, it's extremely difficult to give up the fear, respect, and worship of Lord Narayan. But the worshipful Lord is most merciful and always absorbed in loving pastimes. When the Lord sees the living entity's advancement and awakening of rasas such as Sakya, then the Lord mercifully becomes the object of those advanced rasas and enjoys transcendental pastimes with the living entity. Shri Krishna Chandra is the ideal object for the propensities of bhakti. Therefore, cultivation of Krishna consciousness is the ideal symptom of pure devotional service. In this cultivation of Krishna consciousness, one should not maintain any desire other than the advancement of his constitutional duties. If one cultivates the desire for liberation or sense gratification, then one's rasa will not develop and his cultivation will result in jnana or karma. One should be careful that fruitive activities and speculative knowledge do not cover this wonderful, subtle propensity. If jnana covers this propensity, then one will be attracted to Brahman and lose one's identity. If karma covers this propensity, then one's heart will become attached to dull fruitive activities like an ordinary smarta, and will ultimately leave Krishna to engage in atheistic activities. Qualities like anger are also a type of cultivation, but by cultivating Krishna consciousness in such a mood, one will taste the opposing rasa enjoyed by Kamsa. Therefore, this type of cultivation is unfavorable. At this juncture, one may argue that if bhakti is like karma and jnana, then the names karma and jnana should have been sufficient. What is the need of uselessly naming some practice as bhakti? The answer to this question is that the science of bhakti cannot be explained in the name of karma and jnana. There are separate results in constitutional, conditional, and desirous activities. The principal goal of all activities is to attain one's constitutional occupation, of this there is no doubt. But all activities have their own irrelevant fruits. For example, the irrelevant fruits of bodily activities are nourishment of the body and sensual pleasure. No one can deny this. The irrelevant fruits of mental activities are happiness of the heart and sharpness of the intelligence. One who surpasses these irrelevant fruits and searches for the principal fruit may develop a devotional mood in his activities. That is why activities with irrelevant fruits are known as karma kanda. Karma and bhakti have been scientifically divided in order to incorporate the favorable fruit of karma into bhakti. Similarly, jnana, that simply aims at liberation, is called jnana kanda, while the favorable fruits of jnana that help one progress toward the goal of life have been incorporated into bhakti. There is something more to be said in this regard. If all karma and jnana aim at attaining the principal fruit, then they may be considered bhakti, but only some karma is meant for attaining the principal fruit. These activities are identified as direct devotional service. Some examples are worshiping the Lord, chanting japa, following devotional vows, visiting holy places, studying devotional scriptures, and serving the devotees. When other karmas and their irrelevant fruits aim at the principal fruit, then they may be called indirect devotional service. Similarly, knowledge of the Supreme Lord is closer to bhakti than knowledge of Brahman or feelings of renunciation. If renunciation and knowledge of Brahman, along with their irrelevant fruit, liberation from Maya, helps one achieve attraction to the Lord, then they are also included in bhakti. Another name for karma kanda is karma yoga, and another name for jnana kanda is jnana yoga or sankhya yoga. The main purpose of sadhana is to awaken one's attraction for the Supreme Lord. When favorable karma and jnana are dovetailed with bhakti, they're called bhakti yoga. Those who cannot understand the synthesis are improperly engaged either in fruitive activities, speculative knowledge, or demigod worship. It is indicated in the Bhagavad Gita. Only the ignorant speak of devotional service, karma yoga, as being different from the analytical study of the material world, sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service, and who therefore sees analytical study and devotional service to be on the same level, sees things as they are. One who works in devotion, who is a pure soul, who controls his mind and senses, is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to him. Though always working, such a man is never entangled. In other words, such a person performs physical, mental, and household activities up to the end of his life without accepting the irrelevant fruits of his activities, because all his activities and irrelevant fruits are engaged simply in nourishing attraction for the Supreme Lord, which is the principal fruit. The purport is that the above-mentioned yogi, who can synthesize his various activities as worshipful and superior, to the karma yogis who have attained perfection such as anima and lagima, or the jnana yogis who are attached to liberation. The wonderful process of bhakti yoga has 3 phases: sadhana, bhava, and prema. Due to forgetfulness of one's identity, the conditioned living entity under the influence of false ego identifies with his body. The priti, that is the constitutional nature of a living entity, is at present pervertedly transformed into priti for objects of the senses. In this condition, one should endeavor to follow pratyagati for attaining one's constitutional duties. Under the influence of the false ego, the living entity accepts a form made of material elements and their qualities, and with an irreligious mentality and the help of the senses, experiences happiness and distress. This material attachment is called the current of parag. In other words, one's internal feelings are improperly flowing externally. When this current is brought back from external objects, it is called the current of pratyag. The method by which this is achieved is called sadhana bhakti. When one's original propensities are carried away by the perverted current in the instrument of the senses, then one becomes absorbed in material objects. These propensities then become absorbed in material sense objects, tasting through the tongue, smelling through the nose, seeing through the eyes, hearing through the ears, feeling through the skin. This current is so powerful, it is not possible for the mind to check it. The process for checking this current is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita as follows. There are 2 ways for checking this current. If an embodied soul is deprived of sense enjoyment, his taste for sense objects will certainly be checked, but it is impossible for an embodied soul to remain aloof from material sense objects. So if there is another process to check this current, then it is one's duty to follow that process. There is one ultimate process to divert the current of attachment from sense objects. When the current of sense objects meets rasa, it is enchanted. So if that current is diverted to a rasa that is superior to material rasa, it will naturally accept the superior rasa, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Thus, when a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which caused his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of true work. This is the principal truth of sadhana on the path of raga. The whole life of a sadhaka on the path of raga is dedicated to cultivating Krishna consciousness. This cultivation is divided into 7 categories as follows. I'm going to repeat that verse from Bhagavatam because I read one word wrong and it made it not understandable. The verse actually reads, "Thus, when a man's activities are dedicated to the service of the Lord, those very activities which caused his perpetual bondage become the destroyer of the tree of work." The cultivation is divided into 7 categories as follows. 1. Spiritual cultivation, priti, realization of sambandha, abhideya, and prayojana. 2. Mental cultivation, remembrance, thinking, meditation, concentrated meditation, samadhi, consideration on the science of sambandha, repentance, yama, and purification of the heart. 3. Bodily cultivation, niyamas, serving others, seeing and touching the devotees and the Srimad Bhagavatam, praying, hearing, engaging the senses in devotional service, transformations of ecstatic love, developing the mood of servitude to the Lord. 4. Cultivation of speech, chanting hymns, studying, kirtan, teaching, praying, and preaching. 5. Cultivation of one's relationships. Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Kanta. There are two types of relationships with the Lord and with the Lord's associates. 6. Social cultivation. Varna. Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Their occupations and positions are divided according to people's nature. Ashram, Grihastha, Brahmachara, Vanapras, Sannyas, and according to social situation. Assemblies, general festivals, and activities like sacrifice. And 7. Cultivation of sense objects. The following sense objects help one in the development of Krishna consciousness. The objects for the eyes of the deities, the temple, the scriptures, the holy places, spiritual dramas, and spiritual festivals. The objects for the ears are the scriptures, songs, lectures, conversations. The objects for the nose are tulsi, flowers, sandalwood, and other fragrant items offered to the Lord. The objects for the tongue are kirtan, and taking a vow to accept only palatable foodstuffs and drinks that were offered to the Lord. Objects for the touch are the air of holy places, pure water, the body of a Vaishnava, soft bed offered to Krishna, association with a chaste woman in order to propagate a God-centered family. The times like Hari Vyas, Ekadashi, and festival days. The places like Vrindavan, Navadvip, Jagannath Puri, and Namasharanya. If one's attachment experiences the higher taste of Krishna consciousness, then that attachment will naturally give up material objects and be absorbed in that higher taste. When attachment is absorbed in material objects, how can it experience a higher taste? Therefore, Vaishnavas, who are the well-wishers of all living entities, have devised a process for dovetailing material objects with Krishna consciousness. Although the creation of Maya is a perverted reflection of the pure absolute truth, she is the maidservant of the Lord and always engaged in his service. So, if one desires to worship Krishna through Maya, she abandons her adverse aspect and accepts that worship with respect as a devotee. This is the great mystery of the Vaishnava faith. In order to establish the Vaishnava family for the welfare of the living entities, Sri Narada Goswami gave Vyasadeva the following hint in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Know for certain that this material world is non-different from the Lord because it is created, maintained, and annihilated by him. The spiritual world, Vaikuntha, is the Lord's eternal abode. This visible material world is only the reflection of Vaikuntha. The ingredients, existence, and nature of this material world are therefore simply imitations of Vaikuntha. The conditioned living entities are the enjoyers of this material world. The fault of the material world is the living entities here are rebellious by nature. O Vyasadeva, don't be afraid of describing the pastimes of the Lord through the medium of this material world, because, in truth, describing the material world is the same as describing Vaikuntha, for they are considered material or spiritual only due to one's conviction. If you describe this material world in terms of its relationship with the Supreme Lord, then your attachment for Vaikuntha will automatically awaken. This fact is already known to you through your own self-realization. Since you have asked me, I have given you this synopsis. Please, therefore, describe the pastimes of the Lord through the process of natural samadhi, and thus guide the living entities toward Vaikuntha. You have previously described mundane religious principles and the process of pseudo-samadhi, which are not always beneficial. People who follow the Pratyak current have established the whole world as a Vaishnava family by dovetailing material objects in God consciousness. People who enjoy eating grains can eat Mahaprasad that's been offered to the Lord and in this way practice the pratyak current of the tongue. Similarly, those who are fond of hearing can hear the names and pastimes of the Lord, and thus practice the pratyak current of the ears. In this way, they gradually engage their senses and sense objects in the service of the Lord, and thus increase their internal current of rag by providing their senses a higher taste. This is called sadhana bhakti. In order to deliver the living entities from the atheistic mentality of I am the enjoyer, Sri Mahadev, who is worshipped by all Vaishnavas, has established in the Tantras different methods such as Lata sadhana, Vamachara, Virachara, and Pashvachara. Ultimately, Sri Mahadev has established the Supreme Lord as the enjoyer and the living entities as the enjoyed. It created a platform from which one can achieve raga for people of different qualifications. Okay, I have to read that line again. I skipped a line. Ultimately, Sri Mahadev has established the Supreme Lord as the enjoyer and the living entities as the enjoyed, and created a platform from which one can achieve a higher taste for material sense objects. There is no contradiction between Tantra Shastras and Vaishnava Shastras. They are simply different provisions on the path of raga for people of different qualifications. Sadhana Bhakti is divided into 9 processes as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of Lord Vishnu. Remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with body, minds, and words. These are the 9 processes of sadhana bhakti. Some rishis have divided these 9 processes into 64 processes. Various people have attained perfection by following either one of the processes, some of the processes, or all of the processes. There are 2 types of sadhana bhakti, Vaidhi and Raganuga. Those practitioners whose raga has not yet awakened are eligible for Vaidhi bhakti in the form of scriptural injunctions. They are the followers of pure devotees. The practices of those who have no raga but who try to imitate the raga of the acharya and thus engage in sadhana are called Raganuga sadhana. This is also a form of regulated devotional service, but in its mature stage, Raganuga sadhana is no longer controlled by regulations. When sadhana bhakti matures, or when a little bhava awakens by the association of devotees, the jurisdiction of Vaidhi bhakti is crossed. The symptoms of the 9 processes of devotional service are found equally in both sadhana bhakti and bhava bhakti, but in bhava bhakti they're more deep. In bhava bhakti, the internal mood of a servant, friend, surrendered soul becomes more prominent. In sadhana bhakti, gross bodily activities are more prominent. But in bhava bhakti, the activities of the spiritually reflected subtle body, being very close to the subtle existence of the soul, are more prominent than gross bodily activities. In this situation, one's bodily requirements diminish. One's desire and endeavor to attain prayojana become very strong. At that time, one develops from among the limbs of sadhana bhakti a special taste for chanting the holy names. When bhava matures, prema bhakti awakens. As long as one is connected with the material world, prema bhakti cannot attain pure priti, but remains a replica of pure priti. Persons who have attained the stage of prema bhakti achieve all purusharthas. Their pure, powerful existence weakens their gross and spiritually reflected or subtle existences. There is no superior state in life than this. Many apparent contradictions may be found in the characteristics of persons in prema bhakti. Their characteristics, however, are actually most pure and independent. Regulations or reason cannot control them. They are not under the control of any scriptural or sectarian injunctions. Their activities emanate from compassion, and their knowledge is naturally pure. They're beyond the dualities of piety and impiety, or religion and irreligion. They always remain situated in the self, and they always see Vaikuntha, even though they may reside in a material body. Ordinary people do not give them much respect because Kanishta and Madhyamadikaris are unable to understand their qualification and thus criticize them. They perfectly understand the purport of the scriptures, and according to the situation, they sometimes act contrary to those injunctions. Seeing this, ass-like people may call them misbehaved. Sectarian people who see that they are not decorated with the signs of a sect conclude they are irreligious. Logicians who see their loving dealings may consider those dealings unreasonable. Dry renunciates who see their physical and family endeavors may mistakenly consider them as attached to their house or body. Persons attached to material enjoyment who see their detachment from work may suspect that they are inefficient. Jnanis who see their indifference toward impersonalism may consider them unreasonable. Materialists may consider them mad, but actually they are fully independent and spiritually situated. For all such people, the prema bhaktis are aimless and incomprehensible. Although the exalted prema bhakti's devotional service sometimes resembles fruitive activities, it is never actually tinged with karma, because whatever activities they perform are only meant for their liberation from fruitive activities, not entanglement. Although their devotional service sometimes resembles speculative knowledge, it is never actually tinged with jnana, because their pure knowledge is not polluted with the dirt of impersonalism or voidism. Although knowledge and renunciation is their wealth, they do not consider these part of their devotional service, because it has been concluded that bhakti is different from knowledge and renunciation. The swan-like prema bhaktas are worshipful examples for all devotees, even though they act like a farmer amongst farmers, a businessman amongst businessmen, a servant amongst servants, a general amongst soldiers, a husband with his wife, a parent with his child, a wife with her husband, a child with his parents, a brother with his brothers, a chastiser with the criminals, a king with his subjects, a subject with his king, a thoughtful person amongst the learned, a doctor with his patient, patient with his doctor. By the mercy of the pure devotees, we are constantly desiring with undeviating attention the shelter of the lotus feet of the divine couple, who is their only wealth. O Prema Bhakta Mahajans, please shower the rain of your mercy in the form of your association and moisten our hard heart, which is attached to argument and crushed by material enjoyment, that the wonderful transcendental truth of the divine couple, who are the absolute truth without a second, be reflected in our purified and melted heart. Om Hari. Shri Krishna Panam Astu. End of conclusion.